Hello. Hi. Welcome to DC Public Library, to MLK Library. If this is your first time, if you've been here 100 times, welcome. I am Diana Vega, Civic Engagement Coordinator for DC Public Library. Yes. And this is what democracy looks like storytelling show. Oh, yeah, thank you. Yes. So all week we have been celebrating Civic Learning Week, which is sponsored by iCivics. And we've had a lot of great programming this week, and we've had a system-wide project at all of the branches where people can come in and fill out a card that you put your name and you circle one. To me, democracy means, and you fill it in, home rule is important to me because, and I vote because. So we asked people to fill the cards out tonight, and if you did, I might pick your name, and you will get a giveaway. It is a book called Dancing in the Darkness, Spiritual Lessons for Thriving Turbulent Times, signed by Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III, who kicked off our Civic Learning Week last week. So we are so excited that you all filled out your cards, and you might win a book. It's Women's History Month. And tonight, we didn't plan it this way, but we have 4 awesome women who are going to tell true personal stories about how they preserve democracy, work to expand democracy. There are going to be some really great stories. And we want to thank Story District and Amy Sedman, who's walking around in the back. Story District provided coaching to our storytellers, and we'll get into more about them later in the show if anyone has never heard of Story District. So to kick things off, I'm going to read 2 of the cards that I pulled. So the first is from Catherine C. I vote because it is the most fundamental and easiest way for me to create the change I want to see in the world. And as Americans, our vote impacts global communities. Thank you. Where's Catherine? All right, you get a book. You can meet me after for your book. And in addition, part of our celebration of Civic Learning Week, we are really focusing on it being 50 years of home rule, which means 50 years of DC residents being able to vote. But we all know we have taxation without representation, and we need to continue to fight and expand. So that's why we have home rule is important to me because, and Kara Fulton wrote, we need control over our budget and laws. Let's eliminate congressional approval. Where's Kara? All right, so come pick up your book at the end of the show, and I'll read some more. So our first storyteller is very special because she's actually my mama, and I made her do this show because her story is amazing. Wait till you hear it. So please welcome to the stage Dr. Carolyn Peoples Vega.
Good evening. It didn't take much arm twisting for her to get me to participate because my story is a part of history and I enjoy sharing it. I was born in Selma, Alabama, and by the time I was 15 years old, the civil rights movement was in full swing. My parents, my grandparents, 16-year-old brother, 13-year-old sister and I were very active in the protests and marches for the right to vote. When we first started trying to get the right to vote in Selma, we had to fight for it. So our marches occurred on a regular basis, almost daily, trying to get the right to vote and equal rights that we thought were guaranteed to us by the Constitution. My mom frequently tried to register to vote and was often turned away by the white voting registrars because of the literacy test, and you all have heard about counting the number, guessing the number, jelly beans in a jar, and quoting from the Constitution. But that didn't deter people. They kept going back and going back. So our family was actively engaged, civically engaged in the movement. My parents often alternated marching because if one of them were jailed, they wanted a parent to be available to take care of their 7 kids. So they had to be very strategic about that part of the protests. So as we continue to move towards voting rights, John Lewis and Reverend Hosea Williams were in Selma and had planned a march from Selma to Montgomery scheduled for March 7th, 1965. Our parents had told the teenage children that we could not participate in the march, but we did want to go to the mass meeting because it was always a mass meeting before the march began. But on that particular day, our parents were going to a funeral, and they explicitly told us, do not go to the mass meeting and to stay home. Well, as soon as they left, you knew what we did. We were teenagers. We were on the front line for justice. So we went to Brown Chapel Church to the mass meeting. Now, the mass meetings were like a rally where we had prayers and encouraging speeches about staying in the fight. And so it was just very energizing. They prepared you for what you would endure when we left the church to begin the march, where you might have the jeering and cursing and possible violence from the white bystanders. So it was like a training ground. So for this particular march, we prayed, we had the prayers, and Reverend Hosea Williams and John Lewis prayed for the safety of the marchers as we began to leave the church. Now, I already said we weren't even supposed to be at the meeting, but we decided since we were there, we wanted to participate just a little bit in the march. So we had a plan. We would stay at the end of the line, only go as far as the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and then go home. So when we came out of the church, we took our positions. And normally, when you were headed towards a march, there would be singing freedom songs, call and responses. What do you want? The right to vote. When do you want it? We want it now. But on this particular day, there was silence. No singing, no talking, just silence. And I remember that the jeering and cursing from the white bystanders seemed so much louder. And then I thought, we're walking on holy ground. So we continued to walk in silence. And as we were approaching the bridge, since we couldn't see ahead of us, we weren't sure what was going on, so we kept walking. But I need you to understand one thing about the Edmund Pettus Bridge. It's built like a bell curve, and you can't see the other side until you get to the top of the curve and begin to go downward, and then the other side becomes visible. So as we kept walking, we began to feel this energy and see the crowd being pushed back. So we took off running for home. So of course, when we got home, our parents were there. They were so worried about us. They were upset that we had disobeyed them, but they were relieved that we had not gotten hurt. And we didn't understand why until we turned on the news and we saw the marchers being beaten by the Alabama State troopers, trampled by horses, tear gassed, and we were horrified. We were hurt. We were saddened by all of this violence. And I remember we were asking our parents, why is this happening? And they said, this is how the country is right now, but this is what we're fighting against. So as we went through the night, my mom, who was charge nurse on the night shift at the segregated black hospital where the marchers were being taken, and John Lewis was one of the most seriously injured, that night she got a call that all the nurses had to return to the hospital to provide emergency care. So we experienced that trauma as children, and when the world was looking at that violence as strangers, but we were looking at it as our friends, our classmates, our relatives, our neighbors, and it was a different feeling for us. So when the violence of that day settled, Dr. King and the civil rights leaders went to Washington, D.C. to put pressure on President Johnson to provide federal guard protection for the marchers. So the march successfully started again in 2 weeks and was successful. So for me, my part in that history is very important. But for you, it is important that no matter your age or where you are, you can always stand up to injustice and oppression. And I believe that as bleak as things seem now, and as bleak as they seemed then, as long as we have life, and as long as we can continue to resist injustice. That violent day, March 7th, 1965, was memorialized as Bloody Sunday. And it is a reminder to all of us that it's the responsibility of each generation to shape democracy for what we want it to be. Thank you.
Yay, thank you. Keep it going. That's my mommy. She has always been an inspiration, her, my grandmother, my family, and why I really enjoy doing this work and feel this work is important. So now we're going to do 2 more giveaways. The first is, to me, democracy means, and Veronica Branch wrote, full rights to all citizens of the United States. Veronica? Yeah! You can get a book. And Claire, is it Placed it? Said, I vote because my voice, my choice. I don't have a right to complain if I wasn't part of the process of choosing who represents us. Thank you, yes. Get your book. All right, now coming to the stage, please put your hands together for Zainab Musini.
Hello. So it's January 20th of 2020. I've been invited to introduce myself to a committee. And I've been invited because I have just announced my candidacy for the Democratic nomination for a U.S. House seat. And I meet the basic requirements, which are you have to be at least 25 years of age, you have to have been a U.S. citizen for at least 7 years, and you have to live in the state that you're trying to represent. But I'm meeting this committee because it's their job to make sure that there's a Democratic nominee on the ballot. And I'm meeting them to get their support and get the process started to get on the ballot. So it's evening time. They told me to meet them in this office building on the 2nd story in Fairfax. So I walk in. I'm nervous, just like right now. So I walk in, and it's like this huge conference room, and the committee members are sitting around it. So I walk in and say hello, thank you for having me, and then I say, because it's January 20th, it's MLK Day, so instead of talking about my policy platform items, And because most of my policy platforms have been inspired and informed by MLK's activism and legacy, I have prepared a written speech that I'm going to read. So I'm nervous, I'm dry-mouthed, but I'm like confident because I'm like, everybody loves MLK. And then in this speech, I have included parts of quotes from his Beyond Vietnam speech, where he talks about U.S. wars abroad, and heavily incorporated his parts of his letter from Birmingham jail, and where he talks about how white moderates are an impediment to progress in the United States. So I feel pretty good. And if you're unfamiliar with this speech, it's where justice delayed is justice denied comes from. So I read my 2-page speech, and then the last line of the letter is, shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will, and lukewarm acceptance is more infuriating than absolute rejection. And I say, Dr. King wrote these words almost 57 years ago, but still resonates with our current society, and thank you. And then as soon as I say thank you, one of the committee member has already stood up, slaps both of his hands on the table and says, I am offended that you are blaming white people for the problems that our society is facing. You said white people 7 times in your speech, because I counted, and that goes against the legacy of MLK, and Obama would never say that. So I am so taken aback. My confidence is crashed because everybody loves MLK. So all I can say is, I'm sorry you feel that way. And other committee members feel bad for me, so they start asking me questions. One of the first questions I get is, what qualifies you, or why are you challenging Jerry Connolly? He has been in the seat for so long, he's been involved in local politics, we know him. To which I say, well, he's a moderate Democrat in a solid blue seat, so I think we can afford to have a left-leaning person in this seat. Second, he is representing a district that's majority people of color, and that's not representative of the district. And then also, he sits on the Foreign Affairs Committee, but has hundreds of thousands of his own personal money invested in the defense industry. And he gets to make a decision about whether we go to war or not, and then he personally profits when we do. And then also, he has repeatedly authorized the Patriot Act, which allows the surveillance of Muslim Americans. And then people ask me, well, what qualifies you to be in this seat? To which I say, I'm an activist, I'm a community organizer, I'm a canvasser, so I have a strong pulse on the issues that this district is facing because I go door to door and talk to people. And so this exchange continues, and then in this moment, I realize they very often say in feminist circles, politics is personal, and this moment clicks it for me. It's personal to me because it is the US foreign policy of supporting the Mujahideen in Afghanistan in the 1970s and 80s that forced my family to uproot and become immigrants. It's the US policy around immigration that makes me, or not just my experience, but people who I talk to, that makes it really hard for immigrants to live in this country, not just all immigrants, but mostly immigrants of color. And it is the education policy that has me in $50,000 of student loan debt. It's a celebratory thing because I became the first person in my family to graduate college, but I'm gonna be impacted by this debt that I have for the rest of my life. And the exchange continues, the meeting is adjourned. I'm being escorted out by the committee chair, and he puts his hand around me in like this paternalistic way and says, I don't know what he says to me exactly as he's walking me out. What I get is, I can't force you to take your nomination back, but good luck. And then this becomes this theme throughout my campaign. I face a lot of challenges, but what keeps me going is the support that I get. I have multiple women of color who tell me that this is the first time they have ever felt like they're being represented in the political process. I have young people who are full-time students, but also full-time volunteers on my campaign. I have people who tell me that this is their first time voting. They feel very excited because they resonate with the message of my campaign. And then I have a couple letters from abroad that tell me that they are sending their ballots and feeling really good about it for the first time in a really long time. So I continue my campaign with these two realities, and the campaign ends, I lose. But I get 22% of the votes with $30,000. Thank you. And my opponent spends $1.5 million. So I live with this dual reality to this day, and I live in this discomfort of clearly this political system that we have in place isn't working for majority of Americans, but people in positions of power will do anything to keep the status quo. And I sit with discomfort today, and I feel very discouraged and disheartened by our political process today. Thank you.
Yes, keep it going. Thank you for sharing your story. It is hard to fight money in politics, but thank you for taking the risk and doing what you had to do. Thank you so much. All right, before we get to the next storyteller, the next person who wins a book is Tracy Belts. All right. And it says, to me, democracy means educating our citizens in key subjects such as economics, human rights, civics, and social justice, and providing every opportunity to let them vote in safe and fair elections. This also means campaign finance reform to limit corporate contributions that influence candidates' platforms and ability to win an election. Good governance. Thank you. Thank you. All right, coming to the stage next, please welcome Alexandra Russell.
I stood on a grassy area off of 14th Street in downtown DC, close to 14th Street Bridge, watching in shock as truckload after truckload of National Guard troops rolled by. It was May 3rd, 1971. I was 16 and a pacifist like my mother, who never allowed any war toys in the house. I'd come downtown with two high school friends, Tom and James, to participate in what promised to be a huge demonstration against the war in Vietnam that was causing so much death and destruction. The organizers of this event were planning to shut down the Nixon administration by blocking morning rush hour traffic. The three of us, however, were careful not to even block the sidewalk, and a few dozen other observers milled around us. Across the street, several police cars were parked, and the cops were busy strapping on their riot gear. My palms got sweaty, even though I wasn't one of the brave people blocking the streets. Suddenly, they charged us. We all took off running. But someone in the crowd yelled, "Don't run, walk, go with dignity. We haven't done anything wrong." Yeah, I thought, I haven't done anything wrong. I slowed to a walk, and so did Tom. James kept running. Soon a cop grabbed Tom by the back of the collar. "Am I under arrest?" he managed to choke out. "What do you think, you dumb shit?" the cop replied. I stopped in my tracks, indignant. "Where are you taking him?" Another cop grabbed me by the arm and said, "Don't worry, you're going with him." Stunned, I was loaded onto a DC bus with Tom and other detainees and driven across town. Along the way, the bus picked up protesters who'd been tear gassed, and my eyes and nose began to sting. The bus drove us to the DC City Jail, a forbidding dark red brick building, and pulled into a sinister underground parking lot. There, my stomach clenched when Tom and I were separated as he was hauled off to the men's facility. I was placed in a holding cell with about 15 other young women. 2 of them were bleeding from injuries they got after being hit by tear gas canisters, but no one was in sight. We all yelled and banged on the bars until finally a guard came and took the injured women away. Then it was quiet, and my situation began to sink in. I was locked in a cage, though I hadn't broken any laws. There'd been no processing, let alone a phone call, so my family wouldn't know where I was. Fear gripped my throat. How would they ever find me? How would I ever get out? How long would I be stuck there? The tears welled up and started trickling down my cheeks. But the women sitting on either side of the jail cell bench next to me reached over and patted my shoulders in comfort. We were all in the same boat. Meanwhile, James ran to my house and told my 14-year-old sister that I'd been arrested. She didn't really believe him, but she told our folks, and our dad, who hadn't yet left for work, headed to juvenile hall to find me instead. Back at the jail, it got so crowded, they moved us to a fenced-in outdoor exercise yard behind RFK Stadium. There, my spirits lifted in the fresh air and sunshine and in the company of hundreds of anti-war protesters. They chanted anti-war slogans, "Hell no, we won't go," sang anti-war songs like Country Joe McDonald's "I Feel Like I'm a Fixin' to Die" rag. Sympathizers came and threw sandwiches and water over the fence to us, and one young man made sure I got some. At dusk, they moved us to an indoor stadium, the Washington Coliseum, where we sat on the floor while National Guards watched us from the seats. The PA system announced that anyone who was willing to be photographed and fingerprinted would be released. But I heard a rumor that a bus was coming to take underage detainees like me to juvenile hall, so I decided to wait. At night, the guards passed out army blankets, sandwiches, and water, and eventually I fell asleep on the hard floor. In the morning, a cop woke me up, and there was my dad, who'd waited all night at juvenile hall for me. I knew he wouldn't be angry with me. A Foreign Service officer, his whole career revolved around diplomacy and cooperation, not warmongering. The cop told him I wouldn't have a record, but warned him, "Keep her off the streets." Back home with my relieved family, my shock turned to outrage. 7,000 arrested in mass disturbances, the headline of the paper screamed. The biggest mass arrest in the history of the country, a record that still stands today, and I was one of them. Along with civil servants heading to the office, students on their way to class, and a few undercover cops. Tom stopped by later that day with an affidavit form from the American Civil Liberties Union. They were filing a class action suit on behalf of all those illegally arrested like us against the government. I filled out my affidavit form and submitted it to the ACLU. But I knew now never again to take for granted the rights we had learned about in high school civics class, starting with freedom of assembly and due process. A few years after my arrest, I learned the ACLU had won its case and I would receive a small settlement payment. I felt vindicated, but most of all, reassured to know that democracy could survive in the US after all, as long as there were people prepared to defend it. Thank you.
Yes, keep it going for Alexandra. Thank you. Okay, we only have one storyteller left. Sad face. So I will tell you a little bit about Story District. If you're unfamiliar, they provided the coaching to our storytellers. And if you're watching and you're like, hey, I would like to tell a story, I think I can do that. Please contact Story District, visit their website, storydistrict.org. They have classes, they do coaching, they have upcoming shows. One on March 27th for Women's History Month at Penn Social, right up the street. So please, please, please follow them on all the social media and get to know them, go to their shows, and tell a story yourself, because we all have a story to share with the world, right? Thank you. Oh my God, I am in that show on March 27th. It's called She Comes First, yes. And so I am in that show telling a story. So you all can come out, right? Tickets still available, yeah. Thank you. All right, so for our next giveaway, I'm going to read the card from Andrew. Okay, Andrew. I vote because, despite what my revered prophet George Carlin felt on the matter, I feel that expressing my desires within a two-party system does help move the needle toward a better democracy. Thank you. Come pick up your book later. Thank you. And now please put your hands together for our final storyteller of the evening, Sandy Dang.
One evening in the year 2000, I received a phone call from a Latino activist urging me to join the effort to organize a tenant association at 1611 Park Road in Northwest DC. I know this building well because whenever I went to visit Vietnamese refugee family, I couldn't breathe. The smell of black mold like rotten vegetable was everywhere, on the walls and up on the ceiling. In this building, out of 16 families, half of them are Vietnamese. The other half are African American and Latinos. Most of the Vietnamese and Latino can't speak English. In order for the organizing to work, we must get everyone on board. Although I want to join the effort, I know that I'm going to have to push myself to work an extra 6 to 8 hours a week on top of the 60 hours I'm already working at Asian American League, also known as AA League, where I'm the founder and executive director, a nonprofit that helps refugee youth to move out of poverty through education. But I couldn't turn my back on these Vietnamese tenants who are also parents in the AA League program. These parents are former political prisoners. They spent many years in prison camp where when they were sick, they received no medicine. When they got out of prison, they couldn't get a job because of their record. These men reminded me of my own father. Here in the United States, they had to depend on their children and people to translate for them. My father, who is fluent in Vietnamese, Cantonese, and Mandarin, would panic anytime he received a letter because he can't read English. He would have to wait for me or my sister to come over and help him translate. So when I heard that the landlord sent notices to these Vietnamese tenants and threatening to evict them, I felt like my blood was boiling. I know the landlord takes advantage of these tenants because they can't speak English. So although I know nothing about tenant organizing, I decided to join the effort. Twice a week, we sat in circle with 16 tenants, a lawyer, and a Spanish translators. We take the time to explain to these tenants the process and procedures. We teach them how to write the bylaw for the tenant association. The meeting is 3 or 4 hours long because we had to conduct it in 3 languages. Most of the tenants could hardly stay awake. Their eye glazed over as the lawyer explained the rules and regulations. I mirrored the same exhaustions after a long day of work. As I sat and listened, my stomach was growling because I had no time to eat dinner between my 2 jobs. On top of that, I didn't know how to translate legal terms like bylaw into Vietnamese. All I can do was depend on the trust that I've been building with these parents. They trust me because I've been coming to their home, visiting them, translating letters for them. Also, their children had been coming to Asian American League to get help with homework and learn how to apply for scholarship. During this meeting, I asked these tenants to give me permission to advocate on their behalf. I only have their best interests in mind. So in the period of 3 months, I accompanied these tenants to open a bank account for the association. I reassure them that they can send their rent to the association's account instead of paying the landlord. But many of the Vietnamese tenants were worried that they would get evicted. They worried that their money be lost in the association's account. Again and again, I reassure them. I promise them that I will be responsible if they lost their money or they get evicted. One of the father, Mr. Hung Dang, say, "We put our trust in you. We're going to hold you to it." I jokingly said to him, "You know where I work. I can't run away." Over the period of 1 year, the Washington Lawyer Committees helped the tenant purchase the building, sue the landlord, and then turn the building over to a nonprofit housing developers for them to renovate the building. Throughout the whole time I'm working with these tenants, my only hope is that they will get to go back and live in a beautiful home where they can breathe fresh air. And they can still pay the same rent, like $500 a month for a 3-bedroom apartment. But to my surprise, 2 years later, the Tenant Association won the lawsuit. The Tenant Association received $285,000 in settlement from the landlord. Each family received $15,000 to compensate for their suffering. The Tenant Association decided to set aside part of the award to give to the 3 nonprofits that helped them. One day, almost everyone from the Tenant Association came to AA Lee and asked to meet with me. They thanked me for my effort and then present a $20,000 check to AA Lee. Mr. Hung Dang said, "We didn't know that we could demand change. We didn't think that it was possible. If no one stood up for us, we would have to leave our homes." I thought to myself, I didn't think it was possible either. But I realized that when President Lincoln, and now I know what President Lincoln really meant when he said, "Government of the people, by the people, for the people." Thank you very much.
Yes, keep it going for Sandy. Thank you. And to all our storytellers for the night, let's give them another round of applause. Our final winner for the night is Susan P. Susan? Okay, that's right. It says, "To me, democracy means, in the truest sense," and then in parentheses, "not now," it means every citizen will or has the opportunity to be heard and influence outcomes that are meaningful to everyone who believes in democracy. Thank you. So I hope that tonight you have been inspired by the stories you've heard and by the people, regular, everyday people who have done the work to expand democracy and have taught us the lesson that truly, it sounds corny, but we all can make a difference and we can all do our part to make change in society and in the world. So thank you for joining us tonight.